Everybody, welcome to wasmCloud Thursday, the first of the year, on the second of the year, first community meeting of 2025 for the wasmCloud community meeting. So thanks everybody for coming. Happy New Year. Great to see all of you here. We've got a nice little quick agenda, a couple discussion items today. I had a feeling it would be a little bit slow because people are still out on their various vacations and celebrations and all that fun stuff. So let me go ahead and get to sharing here. I'm gonna share my own desktop because I'll talk through some code and do a little demo and all that fun stuff. But that's me. On the agenda for today, we have a little demo and discussion to talk about everybody's favorite thing, CI and YAML. Woo. But I promise it is good for us. I want to talk about scheduling our wasmCloud quarter one road mapping session for this year. Talk about some of the feedback that we've gotten on the GitHub discussion, which has been awesome. Thank you all for commenting there. And then I just want to do a quick pointer. We've been doing a couple blogs and putting out some content, and I'm not sure if everybody's been seeing that come across and want to give people the ammo to kind of share that and know what's coming down the pipe. So all fun and exciting stuff. But to start, why don't we go ahead and talk about wasmCloud CI. So many of you have put in PRs into the wasmCloud repository over the last couple of years, as evidenced by big old block of people's faces. And our CI is not the best that it could be. I think mostly what happens is we're pretty aggressive about running checks on PRs to make sure that like Wasm Cloud builds and tests our various operating systems and various scenarios are passing all the time. We're like, all right, we always want to make sure that this is passing. Same thing for Wash and things for all of our libraries, et cetera, et cetera. And we have a lot of tests. Um, and some of them can't be run in parallel with like one little cargo job, so we run all of them in sequence, and this can lead to like kind of a slow iteration loop on the Wasm Cloud repository. So right now we have like our average merge queue time. I wonder if I can actually get to it from here. I think our average merge queue time, which is how we get all of our PRs merged into main, is like estimated like 20 minutes, which has definitely gone down in the last couple of days. But I remember this being around 25 minutes. But this is after they run in the PR. So on average, you're waiting 40 minutes for a new fix to go into main. Kind of takes a long time. So we've been working on some improvements while we have some downtime over the holidays to our CI. And I'll do a quick demonstration of one here. I just updated some of the information on the roadmap about just kind of like filling out the process that we do to plan our quarterly roadmaps and who needs to go through the process and what goes on the roadmap, all that kind of stuff that we've been doing in the road mapping sessions that's now updated in main. But let's say I wanted to make a quick change to this file, and I'll do this in the GitHub editor because I am impure and sad and doing it through the web UI. So let's say we wanted to make a change like Wasm Cloud roadmaps are planned yearly, right? This is not a real change. I'm just going to close it out. But let's go ahead and commit this change. And then I'll create a new branch for this. My thing, roadmap, not real. So we'll sign off and propose these changes. It's going to fail like the lint CC thing and whatever, but I'll open my PR. Now, previously, what this would do is, even though this was just like a change to the roadmap, this would run our Wasm Cloud CI checks. And there's a very good reason for that. The reason why is GitHub has this notion of required checks. So things that have to run and succeed for you to merge into main. Um, Very well documented missing feature here is they always have to run if you are making them a required check. So even for this little markdown change, we had to run our Wasm Cloud CI. We actually went through a couple of, or some of the things we put in, is two required checks now called Wash successful checks and Wasm Cloud successful checks. And these are actually kind of clever hacks around GitHub's API. No, um, These are actually kind of clever hacks around the way that GitHub requires you to specify things. So, what these actions actually do, and you don't have to watch them all run in the background. We'll take a look at like the wash GitHub action, for example. We have this initial job, this very first job that runs before anything else, that uses this action called change files, which you can just basically do with a file filter and then maybe some things to ignore that will report whether or not a file that you should be interested in changed. So for wash, for example, if any of the files change in its dependent crates or the top level cargo file or the workflow itself, ignoring like markdown files and the wash dev container, then we'll go through and run the unit tests and run the integration tests and all that stuff. Because if none of those files change, then there's no output difference in the unit and integration tests. I know this is like baby's first CI, but just hold on for a minute. Down at the bottom, and we do that kind of with this check that says, hey, during this dependent step, if something was modified, then we'll run it. Now, this wash successful checks action, this is kind of the clever hack that I found on various forums. You can require all of the dependent tests, like unit tests, integration tests, the E2E tests, and then if any of them had a failure or wasn't canceled, then we will exit with a failing check. So basically, what we do is if the unit integration and E2E test did not need to run, like when I have like my little roadmap change, then for wash, we will actually check and see if anything relevant changed, nothing did, and then skip right ahead to the wash successful checks action, which will fail, or sorry, which will succeed because the unit and integration test did not need to run. So the end result of this is that for changing a lot of the things in this repository that's not code, which obviously isn't like the normal thing that we're putting in a PR for, all of the CI can essentially run in the amount of time that I've been talking, so the last 2 minutes. Now we have this for Wash, we have this for wasmCloud as well, so the same kind of file filter gate behind this. So if you're just changing something in wasmCloud, you don't need to run the wash integration tests and all of that, which is great. GitHub does have the ability to do path filtering on the pull request event. But again, in order for us to require that wash and wasmCloud tests are passing or there's no change before merging to main, we have to take an approach like this. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out because we don't need it. Here it is. I'm going to go ahead and close this out because we don't need it. But this should lead to a whole lot quicker iteration on some of the things like if you change a Docker file in the Nats KV crate, then that doesn't need to run the full integration test for wasmCloud, all those things. So PR should go a lot quicker. We are also working on a couple improvements. Hopefully, Taylor, I can put you on the spot for our tests themselves. So, often we are making changes in wasmCloud and in Wash, and we want those tests to be a whole lot faster. And Taylor has kind of been iterating here on some of the fixes there. Taylor, did you want to give a little background on like what what makes our tests slow and what
Yeah.
you've been working on?
Yeah, so there's a couple different things. Wash is one of the longest lived pieces of code that's still actively used inside of the Wasm Cloud project. There's your little fun fact for today. Um, and that was written way, 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 way back when Rust was still new for many of us, including Brooks, who first created this project. And so you'll notice that it probably has our weirdest, most spaghetti feeling part of the code base. And part of that is in our tests. And we're improving that. There's some other stuff coming up too. And one of those things was we had networking calls inside of our unit tests, which is not smart. So we took that out. There's no networking calls. They now execute like unit tests and run super fast. Um, we're also working on speeding up a couple other things when we're running the build tests and things. So in that PR that was a draft that Brooks briefly showed, I was making it so we only build wash once for some of the tests, and then I'm going to change some stuff that avoids downloading WDAM and like wasmCloud hosts every time, like when it because it's running from scratch. So um, I'm looking at changing some of that, partitioning the tests. In general, we're trying to add and automate a lot of these things that have been slow. Another thing we're adding here soon that has an open PR for at least the Go stuff is automatically updating docs on the wasmCloud doc site from examples. So all these things are just kind of being put into both A, automate some of the stuff we want to make sure is always up to date for people, and also B, um, making sure that it's faster. So we're gonna have some things that make the wash tests even faster, and then I'll be turning my attention to the Wasm Cloud ones. Obviously, as we continue to evolve here, as all of you know at this point, like the community is growing, and many of you are part of that growth, and so we're trying to make sure that goes as fast as possible and is as easy for people to use and get things merged. So that'll be turning into the next stuff is just trying to make sure we get the Wasm Cloud tests faster so they're not running for ages when things come in for PRs. So yeah, Masood, you had a question?
Yeah, my question is about the integration tests. I have looked into them a number of times, and I always wondered that what's there is it outdated or it's selective? Because, for example, when I was doing the NATS blob store, I was wondering if I should add it to that because I was seeing that the file system and Azure are there. This one should be, shouldn't be. Some stuff are, some stuff aren't. So I really, sorry, I just wanted some kind of clarification on, what's going on and what's included there and what's excluded, and if there is any reason or we just, haven't attended it much.
I mean, it's a great question. So in general, things like your object store we'd want that to be tested. Any mainline provider. Some of the other providers are older and kind of was brought in legacy and don't have as many tests, so that's why those are not present. Um, So yeah, anything that comes in, we want to make sure we have those integration tests for. We are working on splitting out so that the providers are tested separately instead of as part of one big chunk, um, or at least can be cached properly. We're still looking into it, but yes, there should be an integration test there. The ones that aren't there are either an oversight or just legacy stuff that we haven't come back around to that we when we initially moved it over we didn't have it or didn't weren't able to move tests or whatever the reason might have been depending on each individual case. So I would just recommend adding in the test if you want to there, and the fact that the others are missing are not that we shouldn't have them. It's just things happen. So it happens when you've had a project going for 5 years like wasmCloud.
Yeah, Masood, I just saw your thumbs up, but I was just gonna make sure that that answered what you were getting at. I
Yeah, I
might.
did.
Okay.
I, I still I have that integration test problem for the blob store, for the object store. And next quarter, I want to add one for the KVS store, which I did previously. And at that time, I did not know that we produced these things. So I'm going to add one for that. And it would be kind of great that tests first could run, and then, with that, I know that where to go and add them, while submitting the main PR. So they will be part of the main line. Or as Taylor was saying, that if the providers are separated, then add them wherever that thing might reside.
Yeah. I think that would be great. I think with our integration tests, we have a couple of varying strategies. Like we have integration tests for Wash, which is really built around the CLI experience. We have integration tests for Wasm Cloud, which is really built around, all of the core component and interface functionality working as expected and working with, capability providers that we built. So that is a place that you can add in tests. I think that ideally, each capability provider that has its own set of functionality, its own excuse me, its own vendor, basically, like Nats object store. Nats is the libraries that you're going to be testing and making sure that it goes into the object store properly and all of that. I think that does belong at the level of the blob store. Or like, sorry, yes, the blob store in the provider project. I do know that you were running into problems with the actual integration test framework, like writing those integration tests. So it might be helpful for us to like pair or something to work on that because um, an actual problem with running an integration test with our like wasmCloud project we need to address no matter where it goes.
Yeah, and I can confirm that that issue is not related to the integration test that I wrote, but there is something in the framework. And yeah,
Yep.
if you know, we get to that when we get to that.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds good. Well, let's touch base on that one. Keep moving here, but then come back to that in a little bit. All right. I think that's really it. For unless you had any more there, Taylor, I just wanted to show off some of the improvements that we have and just in the spirit of moving things quickly along, and what we have planned to just make sure that we can iterate a little bit quicker on the Wasm Cloud project. Do folks have any other questions about how this is implemented or suggestions or things that you've had friction with when contributing? I know that I think nearly everybody on the call has put in a PR. So um, yeah, happy to entertain feedback there as well. Alrighty. Well, then we can feel free to raise your hand if I'm cutting you off early, but you can just keep on moving. So next thing I wanted to talk about, we've been talking about this quite a bit in the last couple community calls, is the quarter one road mapping session. I know that we said last week that we weren't going to do it this week because holiday week, mostly, some people may be out. We have a lot of people on the community call, which is awesome. So maybe we could have just done it this week. But I want to prioritize as per some of the new road mapping process, like making sure that the most amount of people can be here for the road mapping session so they can add their feedback. We can talk about things on the fly in addition to the discussion that we've already had here on the road mapping side, which I just want to give a personal thank you to Masood, who put in a comment in here quite a few weeks ago. Florian, hey, we can just thank everybody on the call. Mark, Aditya, we actually can thank everybody on the call. So thank you, everybody, all of you, for putting in your feedback for what you want to see the wasmCloud project do over the next quarter, and what you want to work on in the project, which is so perfect. Like anytime, please feel free to bring those suggestions. Like, hey, I want to do this, and I think we should do this. Love it. It's great. So thank you all for coming in on this one. I wanted to propose looking at the quarter four roadmap, which I think two of these things are actually on us as maintainers. Oops. The NATS object store implementation and then use human time instead of milliseconds. I think both of those are in PRs that can move across. I know that the clap autocomplete one, the original contributor came up and said, hey, I did, some of this, but I can't take the PR across the line, which is totally cool. So we need a maintainer to kind of pick this one up. This one is fun, so I might just end up picking this one up, but you don't have to hold me to that. You all are welcome to take it. I was going to propose that we schedule the road mapping session for not next week, which would be the 8th of January, but the next week, the 15th of January. I know that's putting us a little bit into the quarter. It's not like these roadmaps are anything that we are really constraining ourselves to the temporal nature of reality. So all of the things that are noted in this discussion, everyone, I will come through a little bit later today and leave some comments here just to say what I think. So apologies for us not doing that yet. Um, but I also am selfishly proposing that we do it on the 15th because I will be out on vacation next week. Um, I do want to note, hey, great contributor PR there. I do want to note that the entire road mapping process is documented here now, and any wasmCloud org maintainer is welcome to kind of step up and lead the road mapping session. But I wanted to see if folks had any thoughts, conflicts, reservations about scheduling the community call for, or sorry, scheduling the community road mapping session for January 15th.
No problems here. I think I personally think because Brooks wrote up this roadmap documentation, and I think having Brooks run through it one time just so we all get used to it as a community now that we've f officially documented and stamped it, just to do it once, and then I think we start rotating through all the various maintainers down the line um, for going forward into this. I did read through the discussion stuff as well. I was also still I've been trying to clear out my backlog of notifications for months now. Um, but but yeah, I can go try to leave some stuff on the discussion thing. I did read them all though, so thank you all for all those who have been submitting it. I just have been trying to also review the PRs you all have been submitting as well. So it's a little bit of balance.
Alrighty. Well, that sounds good. Then next week we'll have our kind of regular community meeting. And then on Wednesday I can put this out in Slack as well, but I figured there wouldn't be um, much disagreement. We will do our community road mapping session on the 15th. And that's where we'll just kind of, for folks who may have not sat in on that session before, we'll take the suggestions from the community, some of the issues that are in the backlog, consider where the project is going, and kind of push forward a couple of important issues that we are prioritizing for the next quarter. So January through the end of March. Righty. Please feel free to raise your hand if you had more stuff there. But otherwise, I just wanted to highlight some of the blog content that's been coming across on the wasmCloud side over the last couple of weeks, months, weeks, which is the summary videos and transcripts and blogs from the wasmCloud Innovation Day. Not everyone may have attended that session, which was a little bit earlier of last year. Wow, where we kind of did just like a whole wasmCloud community day of introducing some of the latest things that we've been working on, like secrets, kind of a full summary of the secrets support in wasmCloud, some of the important aspects of like how they can be used, and some of the evolution of how our Golang SDKs and the support in TinyGo has come to support WebAssembly components. These are just the first two, but you can see that we have been releasing some of these blogs and summaries on a pretty quick cadence. And this would be a great thing, hint, hint, wink, wink, to share with the folks who you want to kind of give them content about wasmCloud, and who may not have attended the Innovation Day. So I'm not officially asking for anything, but for the folks who maybe didn't go or wanted a refresher, this is a really good write-up, essentially with the transcript and the video and everything from the wasmCloud Innovation Day. So we'll be releasing these on about a weekly or bi-weekly cadence, and I think we have 6 or 7 of these queued up for kind of Awesome Cloud content there. And one big thing that we really want to do is just see how useful kind of these summary blogs are, and maybe even schedule our next Wasm Cloud Innovation Day, because it was a lot of fun. I mean, I had a lot of fun. I don't know about everybody else. I had a lot of fun. So worth it for me. We'll figure it out for everybody else. Anyways, I figured maybe no questions on that one, but does anybody have any questions on Wasm Cloud Innovation Day or content that we're working on for blogs? Yeah, Colin.
Yeah, so I do. It's more of like a big picture thing. The reason I even joined today is because I have like a ton of questions during the end of year shutdown, I went through every page on the documentation, and I've got a list. So if we want, I could talk through that now, or if you want to finish up and you have a Q&A at the end, I can bombard you then.
Awesome. That is the end. It's the end of our regularly scheduled agenda. So normally at the end of the call, we just kind of transition into like total free time for topics and questions and things you want to talk about. So, Colin, do you want to do a is this your first community call? I thought I had seen you
This
on here
is my
before,
first
but I
community
might be
call.
wrong.
No,
Wow.
I think we
Okay.
met at KubeCon. So
Okay,
if I
okay,
look
okay.
familiar, that's why. Yeah, I actually hung out at your booth a lot. Uh, so I met quite a few people because I am
Awesome.
excited about this. And so as I bombard you with all of my questions and feedback, there's two things I want to start off with. One, I'm extremely excited about the Wasm component model, and I'm excited to see it implemented. And then the other, virtually everything I say, I hope I'm the problem, and you can point me to how I am wrong, because that would just fulfill my dreams of how I want to spend the holiday shutdown. Um, so the first
Amazing.
thing,
Colin, did you oh, I'm sorry, I don't want to throw you off on too much of a loop, but
no, tell me I'm wrong
um
now. It's great.
no, yeah, you're wrong. No, normally, you know, when people for the first community meeting, I like to extend an offer to introduce yourself. Did you want to do a quick introduction about like how you found wasmCloud booth, maybe,
Sure.
and like what you work on? So, you know, kind of what brings you to the community meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a software engineer at Cisco in the hardware division. But most of what I do is actually just cloud native software for running the business internal applications. Um, Stumbled across wasmCloud in the weirdest of ways. I work with the Tag app delivery, and I was at their little kiosk, and someone who I've worked with on different Tag projects saw Bailey walking by. Was like, "Hey, Colin, have you met Bailey?" I said, "No." And so he introduced me. We started talking. Uh, she said, "Yeah, stop by the booth." I said, "Okay, I will. I'll find it eventually." Tried to find it, couldn't find it. Next day at Platform Engineering, Platform Coffee, um, Victor showed up, and I just by chance happened to stand next to him for long enough for him to bombard me with plenty of information. And so he was like, "Yeah, come find the booth." And once again, I looked for the booth. That time I found it. So I was able to learn more. And some use cases that I had in mind, I was able to at least verify with the sanity check. Um, so yeah, that's and as far as the rest of it, I have not contributed. Barely, I'm going to go through the list of why I'm not up to speed on where Wasm is today, and hopefully we can correct some of that at least.
Sounds great. Yeah, thanks for doing a little introduction. Glad you talked to all the right people at the KubeCon. So, um, yeah, okay. Anyways, continue.
Sure, yeah. So this is not in any particular order. So one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of, most, if not all of the guides implement basically one of two architectures. And whether that's the Wasm Cloud documentation seems to implement basically the same one, just several different times, whereas it's a REST request handler that gets called from an HTTP API provider, right? And through that, then it calls back to a key value capability provider. Um, what I'm looking for is how do I break out of just that one specific use case into other architectures where either I'm writing the capability provider for that HTTP router um, that calls the specific request handlers, right? I'm working in Golang. I didn't see any real resources to write a capability provider with an asterisk. It seemed like the resources were very Wasm Cloud specific. Whereas if I break out to something like the Bytecode Alliance website, then it becomes really a question of, is the documentation very good? Mostly no. And is the language support documented well? Also not the best. I'd say of a lot of the docs that I read, wasmCloud had the best. And I don't mean to blow smoke. It's just that's what I saw. Whereas Bytecode Alliance, distant second, and then many websites just 2 years ago, right? And they would say something like Golang full support for WASI, but they mean WASI 1.0, and you have to read for 20 minutes before you find that out. Um, so there was a lot that I was looking for that I wasn't able to find, and I was hoping you could help me get past that. And that's just
Yeah,
one. I've got more.
there, there's a lot there. I have some things that I'd love to talk about, but Taylor did follow the official process and raise his hand. Taylor, do you want me to go? Do you want to go?
Mwahaha. uh, I I am going to drop a link right now, Colin, and I'll let Brooks go about the some example Go providers, so you can see how to do that. But I think Brooks is going to answer some of the other stuff, and then I might peanut gallery in some comments um, based on what Brooks says. So go ahead, Brooks.
Yep, I was going to send a subfolder of that same thing that you sent. So philosophically, right? WebAssembly, you have some code that's implemented in WebAssembly and you want to run it. And unless you're executing it like a CLI, which is not really a common use case, we can kind of do it, but not really. Something needs to call the component to like start it. And often when we see people get started, lots of people write the RESTful HTTP microservices, and it really is a really low barrier to entry to like implement something in terms of an HTTP handler. We already have the HTTP part covered, so you're just doing it in terms of the transport, and then curl your thing. So I think that's especially combined with WASI HTTP being one of the higher level interfaces that is included in WASI 0.2, probably is why you see that example represented all over the place. So philosophical over. Moving past that, we still have the with any code, I guess you still have the you need to send a message or a request or something to execute it. I think you might be really interested, and this is the link that I sent in the chat, in the custom capability provider templates that we have.
Mhm.
There's one for Rust and for Go. And oh, hey, I was looking at events. That's fun. If you do wash new provider, then the custom template Go, this actually clones this down and kind of gives you a local copy, of everything to work with. What this does is it uses a completely custom interface. Um, and we'll take a look at this world here where the capability provider exports a function that the component can call, and it imports a function that a component can export. So this is like maybe closer to what you see in the Bytecode Alliance documentation. But the what the flow of this capability provider is you can use wash, which actually internally just uses nats like the pub sub or like request reply and messaging to send a message to this provider to initiate that like computation flow. But this will show you how a provider can start some processing, call a component, and then how a component can call, a separate capability provider or the same one, um, using a completely custom interface. So this is all like, all user defined types. It's not constrained to like a specific, HTTP. And I thought you might like this because you were saying, how do I get into like writing a provider, calling a component from that? And really the last bit there is that there is a component included in this template that
Yep.
implements the other version of the interface. And this one needs to be updated to use maybe our newest generation code, but it has this custom um, this is the function that's defined in the wit. and it's not an HTTP entry point. Um, okay. Yes, pause. Does that make sense? Is this the kind of thing that you're kind of looking for?
That is, yeah. That's pretty much exactly the kind of thing I'm looking for. So that's great. Really good to see there's resources here. It kind of feeds into my next point, which um, I guess a little bit along the lines of there's not a lot I was able to find beyond the hello world. There's a lot that references things, dependencies, interfaces that have example in their path. Give me a not prod um, vibe. Is that the intention, or is that just naming that could use some renaming in the future? Right? Like when I see interfaces linked in the Go documentation, right? They have example in their path. And I wonder if that was meant to ever be used in production, or if it is literally just an example.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Some of them maybe not, but a lot of them are just to clearly call out that it is an example. Um, I think something that's really important to know too, because there was a question you had asked in your last block too that I think is interesting to call out. The reason you don't see much about capability providers or things anywhere else is because no one else is really doing custom interfaces. I'm going to have just a little bit of a bragging moment for wasmCloud, is that like it's entirely possible. The component model is built to do that, but everyone else is focused on these like very core interfaces right now that they're compiling into their hosts. We use more of the plugin model so things can be externalized. We're planning on adding more and better support for that. So that's why you don't hear so much about that. But that also ties into the like, are these real? The answer is yes. Some of them that you see, like if we could talk about individual ones, but yeah, you could use that one as is, and we could say maybe that one is or isn't. It isn't meant to say like, no, it's not production available. Here is at least one talk I'm dropping in here. There's another one too that Adobe and Akamai gave. One of the other org maintainers, Colin, gave with someone from Akamai, which I can drop to actually now that I'm just talking about it. And American Express was talking about what they've done using wasmCloud, and a lot of their stuff is custom interfaces and things they're building. So this is entirely doable. I've worked with a lot of people like, because I work for Cosmonic. Cosmonic has customers and also open source people. You can talk to the machine metrics folks who show up here, and Vance who's done TM forum stuff. They've all written these interfaces that are completely custom. So it is entirely production available. Some of the examples you see might not be one you want to just go like pull it right off the shelf and use. And that's why we have the example in there. So
Gotcha.
like these custom interfaces, like the only place you're going to really find on how to do that right now is within wasmCloud. But
Mhm.
all the things that they support are entirely component model compatible. It's just no one else really does it right now.
Okay, that's good to know. Because that actually leads to they're all kind of like train of thought here. So that leads to my next, I guess, problem that I'm having is it's really hard to navigate the tooling. I mean, just crazy hard. I had to install the whole Rust tool chain just to compile with tools, I think is built into Wash and abstracted away if I just use Wash, but I found that out after I already installed all of Rust, right? So um, because of that, it's very hard to understand what is Wasm Cloud specific and what is general Wasm component model, right? So like the SDKs, there's the one-liner explanation that I found on the docs for each of the SDKs is if you're building a provider for Wasm Cloud or if you're building a component for Wasm Cloud. What I didn't understand is would they work outside of Wasm Cloud? And the reason I'm asking is because after the shutdown starting next week, I've got some bandwidth to work with another curious tinkerer at Cisco to see if we can embed or make Wasm calls from our device firmware. And he's got Wasm 3 running in a device, but he was never able to wrap his head around the component model. I'm wrapping my head around the component model. So like we were going to try and work together. What I don't know is would a different Wasm runtime support it?
It's a really good question. So I think there's a couple other questions in there, but I'll start with that first one because that seems to be the most important. The only one that I think fully supports it right now is Wasm Time. Wasm Edge is working on it. I feel like there might be one more in there. And look, like just in terms of Starling Monkey, thank you, which is kind of like halfway between runtime and like language tooling. Um, and the thing that just to be perfectly like blunt how things work here, like the component model is complex underneath the hood, and it's necessary complexity. If you actually, as you've probably started to discover digging into it, like you're trying to define something where you have common memory types and then how they're represented anywhere across any art, like that's going to have some complexity to it. The nice thing is that after that complexity is done, the user experience on top of that is actually pretty nice because you just have wit, and then everything can use wit, and then the lifting and lowering generation code. So what you have right now is a small amount of things that are actually implementing that component model. Now, I will say, since you're talking about device firmware, there is a new but still experimental runtime called Pulley. That's or not Pulley, sorry, a compilation engine that's part of Wasm Time called Pulley. Um, I will attempt to find you a link shortly. That is meant for embedded devices and memory constrained and those kind of things. And so that, and because it's inside of Wasm Time, it obviously supports the component model. So it does allow you to compile to these a lot smaller architectures and things that you might be needing to do, or more constrained environments. Because I know, like having talked to a bunch of the networking people before about this kind of stuff, has to be really constrained and fit in a very small space because all that processing power should be going to the routing and the switching and all that kind of stuff. So
Right.
um, that's entirely doable, but it is like that's why you don't see everyone having implemented it yet. But Wasm Time is very quickly becoming a very good general purpose runtime. And from a security perspective, that's a good thing too, because it is heavily fuzzed. It's a common story that you'll hear from people who work on it that like the fuzzing inside of Wasm Time has caught other people's bugs in addition to any of the stuff inside of it, inside of Wasm Time itself. And they're very clear about what's included in those guarantees and what needs to be in that tier. So like the testing and things around it is quite good. So in terms of just answering that top level question, like that's where you're gonna have it. Like that's where the component model support is. And honestly, for something like you're doing with the like if you're doing something on Cisco hardware, for example, then you're gonna probably want to write something directly embedded into like you'll have an embedded host. Now, if you're trying to network them together, that's where something like wasmCloud can become very useful because it's very good at that distributed use case. But like for the absolute best raw performance you're going to get because you still have the overhead of Wasm itself, but then after that is embedding in these basically these bindings. You can write a custom interface and then use the tool chain to generate those bindings for it locally and then embed those bindings into your host. And then anything that runs in it can then consume those bindings is probably that. After that, you start getting into things like we have WRPC, which lets you do plugins over UDS, TCP. We do it over NATs, those kind of things. And then there's future stuff coming for Wasm Time that lets you run essentially like untrusted plugins that are Wasm running inside of your like it still is a separate thing, like a separate plugin. It doesn't necessarily have to be inside of the process, depending on your security boundaries. So there's that. I can answer the questions about the Wasm tools too, because unfortunately I am involved with and or responsible for some of that sprawl. So I can answer that pretty well. But just to pause there, does that kind of answer that question?
I think so.
Okay.
I'll probably have to dig into a bunch of the words you said.
Yeah, I
Um,
figured.
yeah, but I mean, some of these examples will help, like knowing that Wasm Time would be a good runtime that would support it. I'll look at what was it, Pulley?
Yeah, I just
Um,
found you the link right here. Sorry, knew I could find it
Perfect.
if I.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. So looking at that, that'll help. And then exactly what you said, we're kind of tinkering back and forth with the different models, right? Because the part of Cisco that I work for is Meraki, and we have cloud connected devices. So it could work either way, right? Where it runs on the firmware directly, or because it's cloud connected to the Meraki dashboard, we serve up components from there, maybe, I think. Right, so we do have options, and untrusted plugins, that's kind of where both of our brains went, is would customers be able to create their own plugins, or could we have an open source community for plugins people could call from their devices? Which, I mean, from a network engineer hearing me say that, they would just hate every word of that. But it's a thought that's worth exploring, at least from an experiment point of view.
Yeah, you're not alone on that, but I'll let Brooks add some color here.
Oh yeah, I figure you may have already played around with this, but just to give you like a super concrete example of like the cross play between runtimes here, like our example HTTP Hello World component, we build, in a bunch of different languages, but this is the Rust one. We're actually using like a wasmCloud crate to give you nice little HTTP bindings and ergonomics here. But we can, with this Wasm Cloud crate, use the Wasm Cloud tooling to run wash build. But this just runs like a cargo build under the hood to the component compiler target. You can take this and run in Wasm Cloud. You can also take this component directly and run it using Wasm Time Serve, because Wasm Time Serve does implement the HTTP interface and throw HTTP requests at it. And that is all driven, of course, by the component model. So since this component is using WASI HTTP directly, and then some of the standard in, standard out things, Wasm Time implements all these automatically, so you can just run it out of the box. And exactly where Taylor is going with custom interfaces, imports and exports. Wasm Time may not implement that, but you can by embedding the component. So there is the capability provider model is a big helper for this, but there is I think very, very little that explicitly would end up tying you to Wasm Cloud. I'm being cautious, but all I really want to say is that there's nothing that when you build this component makes you run Wasm Cloud, or like it won't let you run Wasm Time as long as you implement the other side of the interface.
Okay. So on that note, with the dependency management that Wash has built in for WIT tools, for example, how can I build my own registry and have Wash be able to decipher that?
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
it looks
So
like anything, yeah, well, it looks like anything that's got WASI or Wasm Cloud prefix is understood. But if I'm going to add like Meraki dependencies, right, there would have to be some sort of mapping to a repo somewhere.
Yes, that is correct. We're toying with some easier. Brooks, can you do me a favor and look up that PR where we added, but it's not yet released, the new format for the. Anyway, okay. I am one of the maintainers of the Wackage toolchain, the Wasm package tooling, the one that does all that. Uh, and I do not love the config file, nor do many of us. It just kind of evolved out of doing it quickly and trying to support a format that we're no longer supporting. So that's going to go away for something that's more like what Brooks is about to link as soon as he finds it. But essentially, all you have to do is make sure that it is stored in the proper format, like the proper OCI artifact format. Um, and you can put it in any OCI registry, and then you can have a mapping that puts it in. So we automatically put in mappings for the Wasm Cloud stuff so that it can pull down from a Wasm Cloud mapped registry. But honestly, with the new format, it's pretty easy just to specify, hey, for anything that's prefixed with like Meraki, right? You just say this, go fetch it from this OCI registry. Um, and then it'll fetch it from there to get the things it needs. So that is pretty much the solution there. You don't have to, the whole goal with why we did all that was so you didn't have to create your own registry per se. You just have to basically tell the tooling this is where the registry goes to, and then store it in OCI, or you can even just store it as tarballs, is also a possibility. Um, so yeah, Brooks has that formatting there. Um, I
Perfect.
think, yeah. So, in terms of the tooling, just so you know, some of the initial stuff that happened was that Wasm Tools is meant to be like it should nothing in Wasm Tools should ever touch network. And we are trying to keep things separate, but that kind of feeling has evolved. So there's things like the Wasm package tools that are, yet another tool you have to install that we're planning on folding into the main Wasm tools. So eventually, I think most tools are going to be inside of Wasm Tools. Now, the wasmCloud side of things is wasmCloud has always been completely like you do not have to use wasmCloud libraries for anything except for providers because providers are a right now a wasmCloud specific concept. Um, but they're using the normal tooling and component model stuff underneath the hood. But anything component related is entirely wrapped inside of Wash. So we'll like when Wash does like when Brooks was showing Wash build, it's using the normal cargo stuff that's available. It's using the Wasm package tools tool chain underneath the hood. When you still had to use adapters, it was doing the adapter step. It basically wrapped all of those tools and steps that you were downloading manually into Wash, as you discovered. And even like pretty much the rule is that if it's prefixed with wasmCloud, then it's wasmCloud specific. Like so, some of the lower level like link name stuff and things like that, that's wasmCloud specific, but you opt into those things. The one exception to that rule is the wasmCloud component crate, which is a basically a temporary staging ground for stuff that eventually goes all the way into the normal like Rust wrapper. This is just for Rust, but like these are the like nice wrappers around some of the types, but they're entirely like those are also still just wrapped over the normal things that are available. That's not wasmCloud specific per se, except for the wasmCloud path. So, yeah, component SDK Go, Brooks mentioned, is similar. So pretty much anything you wrap with anything you use with Wash can be run inside of anything that's component model compatible and has those interfaces available. Like Brooks said, if you have a custom interface, that's a little bit like different because it's not in Wasm time. But if you use something like WRPC or you build your own host with that in there, it will run. Um, so like we've taken a lot of care to make sure it's as like there's not very many Wasm Cloud specific things. The only thing it does in addition is it adds additional metadata to the component that signs it with a key that can be used for identity stuff inside of Wasm Cloud itself, but is not even
Yep.
required and is actually ignored if you just give it to something like Wasm Time.
Okay.
I do have like you were talking about all the composition things. I'll let Brooks talk, but I'm going to pull up a talk that I gave in Wasm Day EU last year that does this in like real time. It shows all the different ways you can kind of compose stuff since you're starting to kind of go down that path of I want to have a set of plugins or I want to have a set of things that users can define that kind of show the different ways you can manage that from a platform level because I know the feeling having talked to many of said network engineers they all start screaming internally as soon as you mention something like this. So I can link you that in just a second.
All right. Appreciate it.
Yes, I forgot I raised my hand. My only comment around the tooling was just on like the Go side. I think the increasing Go support has highlighted where we've been very rusty before. And just wanted to note that it bothers all of us probably as much as you when you're trying to do a Go build for a thing, even if you have to install a different tool or whatever, when you have to install a Rust thing. So, um, the uh one of the main reasons why that happens right now is because there's not a Go native with WebAssembly interface types parser or like a Go native interpreter for a component. And it also happens in wait, I think that's the main one. That's the main one. But just to note, there's basically a whole effort in the Bytecode Alliance to get anything that is Rust specific um, implemented on the Go side, as a Go library, or doing some fun hacky things like compiling the Rust tooling into a WebAssembly component and then embedding it in a Go library. But generally, the end state of all of this is not needing the Rust toolchain to do Go things.
Yeah, that would definitely be ideal. So cool. I mean, that's all very helpful information. The last one is more like, I don't know. I don't know if feedback is the right word or just general bitching. Um, what's not, I mean, the WIT documentation on the Bytecode Alliance page is massive, and I would not say I understood it very well even after my second read through. It was kind of one of those like, hey, I'm gonna spend an hour and a couple cups of coffee reading through this, and then I didn't quite get it, so I did it the next day, and still wouldn't say I really understood it very well. There aren't a lot of hands-on examples that I could find for getting a better understanding of WIT. And if there was something that's, any sort of tutorial that walks through it, that would be really helpful. Taylor, I think you said the developer experience, once you have the underlay, isn't too bad. I would challenge that a little bit because WIT, not very intuitive, at least, coming from my background, Golang, TypeScript, other languages that use interfaces, it's still not entirely clear how it all works together. You have your interfaces in one file, you have your dependencies in another file, you have, depending on what runtime you're using, you might have configuration set in a YAML file, some mappings in a TOML file, right? And how those all work together, both, going back to the previous question, inside the wasmCloud universe versus inside Wasm time. That's not entirely clear. There was one, I want to say it was in the Bytecode Alliance docs, where it said you might have several worlds inside the same package. And I'm like, well, why would I do that? Why would I have several worlds inside the same package? I wasn't quite able to understand that, but I'm sure there's a use case. Otherwise, they wouldn't have said it. And so going back to the big picture, I'm not really sure which persona and like the dev deploy platform infrastructure team really benefits the most from this. I would say most of the work ends up, or at least as far as I can tell so far, most of the work ends up on the developer. But from a developer providing value, like his value proposition, it's not clear that all that work ends up in a net benefit. Right. If I were to tell somebody, hey, I could implement, this Wasm component model, and I could abstract away whichever database I use, someone would say, you mean like an ORM that I've been using for 10 years? And I would have a hard time getting past that kind of cynical approach to it. What I was more concerned about myself is if we were to say, you have a key value store provider, and no matter what your key value technology is that backs it, right, as long as it maintains this interface, it's going to work. My concern was more along the lines of that sounds like least common denominator, right? And there might be a reason that I choose Redis versus Memcache, or Redis versus, or Nats versus Redis, that wouldn't fit into least common denominator, right? So those are some of the concerns I have. I brought this up last because I figured it would have the most feedback, and hopefully, once again, going back to my initial statement, hopefully, no, Colin, you're totally wrong, and here's why. So whoever wants to go first, I
Can
see
I
two hands.
answer part of your bag of questions, actually? I'm a community member. There is no going around, and I believe that you fully understand that. But there is no going around experimenting rather than reading the documentation, because a lot of things that you're bringing up, let's say about width or about the wiring, the TOML file versus this and that, which is really wiring things together. It goes back into, getting your hands dirty and understanding it. And in my experience, width is one of the easiest part of the thing, because again, I find it intuitive, and your experience and my experience kind of showed that how your background and your experience can affect how you kind of approach things and how you understand them. As and again, if it's one word or many words, and those, as soon as you start playing with it, you kind of start realizing that there are different scenarios, and in those different scenarios, you might have different needs, and you might have to mix things up. And some of them are going to end up being much easier, and some of them are going to be a bit more complicated.
Okay, that certainly makes sense.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, Colin, you're completely right about the WIT documentation. It isn't great. That's why we have the WIT cheat sheet. Like that was one of the first things we did as Cosmonic, because we're like, nobody's going to get this. So we did do the WIT cheat sheet, which I linked, which has the examples of like in a single format of everything that you can read.
Uh,
Um,
nice.
so like that should help get it because I agree with Masood. Like once you understand the syntax and what it does, the only thing that's probably going to get you is resources. Um, and we can save that for another conversation. But and or you can go watch the secrets thing actually that Brooks showed at the beginning because that shows a good example of why resources matter, um, and how they're helpful. So the thing is wit will not entirely go away, I think, for people. I think for some of the most basic stuff, like HTTP and all that, developers won't even have to care. I will say we've been very clear with wasmCloud, our target audience is first platform engineers and then afterwards developers. So that platforms such as like what you're doing with at Cisco can be used to enable the developers to then develop something using those interfaces you provide. Now, the reason why I say wit will never go away is actually directly related to your other question around like, isn't this lowest common denominator? The answer is yes and no. So I've absolutely loved this conversation because these are great questions. And it shows you've been really engaged with all the stuff. And so I love answering and talking about this. So WASI, as it stands, are some very core like bootstrapping components, and things like wasmCloud, such as what you mentioned, like WASI key value, are by definition lowest common denominator. Now, the reason for that is to get people bootstrapped because you can look across so many different platforms and those same capabilities are always there. I have a key value thing that can get, set, delete, and maybe like list keys or list multiple, like do a query of some kind. I have a like queue-based deliver like a messaging system, and it's not much guarantees. It's like something can send me a message that then triggers me, or HTTP. Those are the kind, or config. Those kind of things are, well, config is not too hard to do with lowest common denominator, but the rest is like, okay, yeah, but then what about all the other guarantees of my system? Brooks actually gave a talk about this at this past WasmCon with, or no, Victor. It was a Victor. It was Victor did. Victor did with Couchbase, specifically doing that as an example. We have so the Couchbase provider supports both WASI key value and Couchbase colon, I think they call it store or key value. Um, and that's why I say developers will never, I think, get entirely away from wit. But I don't think like if we can make it easy to learn and easy to understand, and you still only define it once, so they will just import. That's actually why you have all those worlds, is you can tell them developers can say include, like Cisco colon this whatever slash world name. Um, and then they can choose, and that's basically a set of things that they get as an interface to use. And so the reason why I said yes and no is that we do start with lowest common denominator, but we fully anticipate, and you can see in the examples we gave, like with the Amex talk and other stuff, that people will then define their own interfaces because internally you might be saying, "Oh, we use Redis for X, Y, and Z reason for these guarantees or whatever it might be," and that's perfectly fine because then you can either use the Redis colon key value interface with which Redis would maintain, or you have guarantees for your platform and you'd have Cisco colon whatever interfaces. And so you write that custom interface that has those guarantees that you want. And it's no longer lowest common denominator, but it removes the need for the developer, which going to your story about, oh, well, I have an ORM. The story, we'll ignore the SQL stuff for a little bit because that's a little bit more of a rough story right now. But if we use the key value example, that actually is a really easy sell because you say, hey, you get all these benefits, but the platform configures it for you. You might be able to give us hints and options and things about how you can tweak it, but the platform will configure it, and all you do is you get linked and you're done to that interface that you've defined as a platform. So the whole point is like the component model, in my opinion, this is where you're getting into the Taylor's opinion. I'm a little bit on a soapbox thing. But in that case, like the component model is not successful unless you support the custom interfaces specifically for that, because we can't do what Common Corba did and have everybody constrain themselves to the exact same interfaces. But we can give people the flexibility to support both or just a custom one. And so I think that's where we see why there's still the wit and where it goes. So like what you have seen is the lowest common denominator. That is a correct observation, but that doesn't mean you are restricted to that, nor that would you build a platform necessarily using that option. You might support it as a thing for people who are coming in, but your primary use case would be like, hey, if you're going to use this platform, use our custom platform thing.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I was looking for more like a hands-on tutorial, something that's better than me just stumbling through my own broken interpretation and taking a lot of time to figure it out. If there is something like that, that would be great. If not, I can continue to stumble. But it is feedback regarding like I'm clearly
Yeah.
very interested in this, right? In terms of onboarding people who are just curious, they may not stumble as willingly as I would.
You're right, and I want to be clear. To back up, yeah, like I think that is very valid feedback, and it's something I think we're aware of and want to do better with. The start of that, I will say, at least from our side, is that talk from Amex, showing like, hey, here's a real world example, or that talk that I gave around here's all the various ways you can compose and define interfaces and put things together. It's getting to a better place of doing that. We have one demo that we worked with in Cosmonic that we might be open sourcing soon, the wasmCloud space demo, which is a fun one that has a lot of that as well, which might be able to be used as a walkthrough. So we'll definitely take that down as feedback of something we want to do. And any learnings you have, if you like do a bunch of learnings and you have all these things, we'd love to host it on the wasmCloud blog or help you get it onto the CNCF blog or whatever.
Yep.
For any of your learnings as well, because that content would help specifically for that reason. Sorry, Brooks, I
Okay.
talked for a while.
No, I had one thing, but then I thought of another thing. So yeah, I think maybe the first thing, and I'll file an issue for this once we get off the call, that we can do for WIT may not be, with our time, it may not be a super comprehensive all everything tutorial, but we can definitely do a better job of sharing our recommended conventions. Like, what should you name your interface? When do I use a record? When would I have multiple worlds in the same file? Like that kind of stuff I feel like would be a really nice, just like with FAQ. Because like I think I'm making an assumption that you probably understood like the IDL, like I define a record and it has some types and that's what I use in my code.
Yeah.
Stuff.
So the individual vocab words were pretty easy to understand. Is applying them to real world scenarios that was difficult for me.
Yeah, great. And I think we have a lot of good expertise from working with it for a while that we can offer. And maybe we can even, our technical writer does a lot of work on or Eric, he's not here today, but does a lot of work on the Bytecode Alliance doc. So maybe we could just get that upstream too. That would be even better. The other thing I was going to say, and sorry for bouncing around, is on the lowest common denominator, like super specific interface bit. One thing that is really cool is even if you tie yourself to a super specific interface, like I need to use these very specific pieces of functionality from like for V8 plus of memcached or whatever, making up a version. So don't take that for anything. You do still get the pretty sweet benefit that you're not compiling that specific version and that code into your component itself, which means that if you're depending on this abstraction or these specific features of a database driver, kind of may feel very much like an ORM. But if there was a security vulnerability in the ORM or in that library, then the old way is you would need to recompile your application and kind of redeploy that, bringing in the new version. The componentized way, or the one when you're interacting with it through an interface, you can deploy the updated version of that SQL driver, that database driver, that whatever, and you don't have to change it on like your application level, which may feel very similar for one app, but when you get on like thousands of
Sure.
applications are on the platform side. Even if you do tie yourself really tightly to a custom interface that has like really specific functionality from only one vendor, um, that's okay. Like it's you have to get a sometimes you have to make that choice to get away from the abstraction. That's totally fine, but you do still get some really neat benefits that maybe we don't showcase really well when just like from our top level documentation.
Yeah. I'm less likely to say like on any given day, like, hey, sign to ditch Redis for Nats and just do that, right? Than I am
Yeah.
to exactly hit that scenario where it's like, oh crap, 20 microservices just got a CVE, and now I got to go spend today, lose a day of sprint, right? Updating all of them. So that's definitely a more valid use case.
Yeah, yeah. It's cool. Well, maybe we can get an issue filed for that or something that's like an extended or like a well, maybe we can make it a part of our quick start, but like an extended piece of our documentation. It's like, here's how you do a dependency update, right? And it's super boring, but is something that's kind of powered by by the component model, by these interfaces.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there's a couple reasons I think it's valid. One, not just on Wasm Cloud Docs, but across the board. Most of the implementation examples I found were very hello world feeling. So anything that gets me to more of a day one, day two experience and use case is going to make me feel more comfortable with the technology. So that's just in that vein, it would be more valuable to provide that kind of information. So cool. That was my list.
Yeah.
Thanks for staying.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, I guess well, we're gonna end anyways, but thank you all for staying a little later. Colin, I think you had a great list. I don't know if we satisfied exactly what you wanted, as in us telling you that you're completely wrong and everything is fine. But hopefully this was super helpful and maybe we can do some more questions and comments and stuff once you get over the fire hose that we've thrown at you.
Yeah, I've got like 12 new tabs open, so I'll go through those over the next couple days.
Awesome. Yeah, that
All
sounds
right.
good. Well,
Thank
if
you
you
very
have
much,
any,
guys.
yeah, sure thing, Colin. Good to have you on the call. Feel free to come ask more questions next week, or if you're in the wasmCloud Slack, like we're available anytime.
All right, cool. Appreciate it.
All right, everyone. Well, I think that does it for today. But thank you for coming to this very special wasmCloud Thursday. We'll be back on our Wednesday schedule next week, and then for the foreseeable future. But um, yeah, I think that's it. Uh,
Have a good
thanks, everybody.
vacation.
Yeah, thanks. Um, I will not see you next week, but everybody should still come here. So have a great